Hi, my name is Roshni Sharma. I'd like to talk to you today about perspectives from Australia and the Pacific around women in surveying. To tell you a little bit about myself, I currently work as a project manager and geospatial analyst for Frontier SI, as well as running my own soft skills coaching, leadership coaching business called Vistar. I am involved in FIG Young Surveyors internationally. I am also a board member of the Surveying and Spatial Sciences Institute, SSI, the peak national body representing our industry nationally here in Australia. And I'm a convener for the Space, Spatial and Surveying Diversity Leaders Network. I'm also a graduate of the Leadership for Women in STEM program from About 5. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we live, work and play on. It is Indigenous and Aboriginal knowledge about land management practices, and view of the environment and the systems that make the earth sustainable that will facilitate us to have a good relationship with the planet sustainably as we move into the future. In 2019 in Australia and New Zealand, the SSDLN, Space, Spatial and Surveying Diversity Leaders Network, released a document called Thinking Differently About Difference. It's an action plan for boosting innovation and collaboration in the space, spatial and surveying sector through diversity and inclusion. You can read the full report by going to the link in the top right-hand corner. But some of the findings around this, as you can see in the white boxes along the right-hand side of the screen, are that there are significant issues around diversity and inclusion, especially related to age and gender within the surveying and spatial industry in Australia. When it comes down to it, the sector has not explicitly promoted diversity and inclusion as key values, and we're coming to a stage now when we can really realize the business case for diversity and inclusion. What I would like to spend today talking about with you is what is needed to empower women in surveying. Because at the end of the day, it's up to us to work through any systemic issues that arise, any roadblocks, and facilitate a stronger, more united way forward. I'd like to take a moment to go over some of the key issues that we face. There is a sense, in some ways, of being invisible for women and other minority groups. When it comes to diversity, both gender and intersectionalities play a part in this. And that brings us to the concept of the leaky pipeline that I will explore a little further. This leads to the need for inclusive workplace cultures that cater to caregiving and other facets that come with gender and intersectionality related diversity. And then we have the issue of looking forward, what sort of future can we build? The issues around capacity building and creating a skilled workforce for the future will need us to tackle all of these problems. And these are not just issues that are faced in Australia and New Zealand, Asia and the Pacific. These are issues that are global. Foundationally, I'd like to introduce the concept of what diversity, inclusion, and belonging are. Diversity is talked about often, and really it just means having a seat at the table or being invited to the party. Inclusion takes diversity one step further and means that we allow the people of different backgrounds who may look and feel and sound different to us, who may put forward different ways of thinking, allowing that voice to be heard. But that doesn't solve the entire problem, because you can still have microaggressions, you can still have unconscious bias that leads to those voices not being heard equally, fairly, justly. And so really the goal is actually belonging. It is to have those voices be heard as though there actually is no difference between what those voices bring to the table and what the majority brings to the table. And so, to go into this a little bit more, I'd like to introduce the concept of intersectionality. In essence, people are not just two-dimensional beings who we can consider in one particular box or another. Every single one of us has race, different levels of education, sexual orientation, ability, age, gender, ethnicity, culture, language, class. These are all the things that come together. And if you tend to look, feel, and sound, whether it's visible or invisible, then when it comes to power, you tend to be part of the majority. People who fall into minorities tend to be marginalized, and that means that they may have difficulty even getting a seat at the table, let alone having a voice or having that voice be heard. The image that you can see on the left-hand side of your screen is focused on gender. However, the wheel does allow us to understand some different aspects of power and disempowerment when it comes to various aspects that bring together intersectionality. When it comes to our surveying and spatial industry here in Australia, we do tend to have an average age of surveyors that is around 55, I think at the moment is the most recent statistics. It might be a couple of years older. And we do tend to lean towards Caucasian males within that. Within the geospatial side of surveying, there does tend to be a lot more cultural diversity, and there are a lot more younger people. There is also a lot more women within the geospatial sector compared to the surveying sector. However, when it comes to all of these things, it's important to realize that there are things that are visible on the surface, such as race, age, gender, ethnicity, but then there are some things that are invisible too: sexual orientation, ability, language, and even education. And this may pose barriers because of the systemic way that our organizations and even our industry are set up to accept different types of people more than others. And that brings me to the concept of the leaky pipeline, where in early school or primary school and even heading into secondary school, we tend to have women choosing subjects that are less likely to lead them into STEM. When they tend to reach university age, they may not feel as competent or confident to be able to step into courses or degrees that will set them up for a career in STEM. Once they get into the workforce, a lack of role models, of female role models or role models who look like them, be it from a cultural perspective, a language perspective, whatever it may happen to be, that links into their personal intersectionalities. And so knowledge and I guess experience may not necessarily be retained in the workforce. People may drop out of surveying and spatial and transfer to other industries such as engineering. When women tend to choose to have families, or when they have older parents or other caregiving roles, there may not be as much flexibility offered to be able to allow them to continue their careers in surveying or, a relevant STEM industry. And so this means that by the time we get to senior leadership roles, unfortunately, there are very few women left to be able to fill these positions. When you count into that bias, largely unconscious bias, then women taking on senior leadership positions to be able to become role models, it just becomes really difficult to break this cycle. And without role models, we're less likely to have young children in primary school or even high school look up and go, I could be a surveyor one day. It doesn't matter that I'm a woman. One of the things that comes along with diversity and inclusion is the need to create inclusive cultures. This slide is based on an article by on the Harvard Business Review website. The link is available in the bottom right-hand corner if you'd like to go there and read to understand it better. But essentially, workplace cultures, in order to be able to facilitate greater inclusion and therefore affect the stemming of the leaky pipeline, and to really take advantage of diversity and push it through from inclusion to belonging, we can consciously design things within our workplaces to be able to make this change. One step is really listening. There is a lot of research out there for the business case for diversity and inclusion, and particularly for cultures that facilitate a sense of belonging, and no matter where or who or how somebody tends to look and feel and identify themselves as. We really need upper management in particular to really listen to what they can do to actually craft success, whether it be anonymous surveys every quarter that really go and understand how people are feeling in their day-to-day experience, or whether it be to, when it comes to recruitment, to have systems in place, as software that you can purchase that allows you to take out identifying pronouns so that you take out or account for unconscious bias when you're recruiting. There's many ways that, focus groups can be run, but really listening and trying to counter unconscious bias is very important when it comes to creating inclusive cultures. Self-reflection, again, is also really important. When it comes to leadership, I'm a firm believer that leadership can happen at any age, any career stage, any position. But leaders from the top, as well as grassroots leaders, really benefit from having self-reflection to understand what success looks like for an inclusive culture, the role that they play in creating this, how they handle their own biases, when do they get defensive, how often do they pay attention to gender balance and other measures of inclusivity when it comes to running events or selecting positions or creating a team. These are all really important things. And it makes a difference if leaders from the top especially are able to role model and encourage self-reflective behaviors to counter unconscious bias. The third metric is vigilance. And so in this instance, it's really important for leaders, both again at the grassroots level and higher up from the top, to be able to call out when there are microaggressions or unconscious bias in a compassionate and empathetic way, and encourage people to be accountable and responsible for positive behavioral changes. And again, as I mentioned, linked to point number 1 here, process changes, to undergo an audit of organizational documents, procedures, processes, to check for whether they are inclusive or whether they could change to be more inclusive. And so that is a bit of an overview about some of the key issues that we face in surveying in Australia and the Asia Pacific. I'd like to offer, if you'd like to contact me on LinkedIn or reach out to me via email, I'm very open to speaking with anybody who is interested about this. I will make a copy of these slides available so that if anybody is interested, they can explore these resources. And I really hope that this short presentation offers you some insights into some of the key challenges that we experience here that I believe are actually shared globally, and some ideas about how we can move forward and combat these. Thank you very much.